That is a flagrant violation of Bylaw 7, Section C. The voice, sharp enough to cut glass and twice as pleasant, sliced through the smoky air. I blinked, my mind struggling to process the sheer, weaponized audacity of the statement. The sky was the color of a dirty tangerine. A fine layer of gray ash was settling on my hair and shoulders like apocalyptic dandruff. And standing at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, visor pulled down low, was Brenda Butterman, president of the Pleasant View Estates Homeowners Association and the undisputed Ayatollah of azaleas. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, setting down a large pet carrier containing 4 kittens who had collectively decided to protest their confinement by mewing in 4-part ear-splitting harmony. Brenda tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the clipboard she held like a scepter. Bylaw 7, Section C. No personal property, including but not limited to storage containers, shall be kept in public view on any driveway or lawn for a period exceeding 4 hours. You, Leonard, have 3 such containers on your driveway right now. I stared at her. Then I stared at the plume of dark gray smoke billowing over the hills a few miles away, a sight that had been getting progressively more terrifying for the last hour. Distant sirens wailed, a constant, unnerving soundtrack to our little suburban drama. "Brenda," I said, trying to keep my voice even, a monumental task under the circumstances. "The hills are on fire. The hills. Right there. We are under a mandatory evacuation order. These are not storage containers. They are pet carriers. For my pets, who I am evacuating. From the fire." I pointed at the smoke for emphasis, as if it were a subtle detail she might have missed. She was unmoved. Her expression was a mask of triumphant rage, the kind of look a tax auditor gets when they find a rounding error. "That is irrelevant. I've received a complaint." My brain short-circuited. Received a complaint? From who? A particularly observant squirrel? Was there a neighborhood watch hotline for aesthetic emergencies? No, of course not. Brenda was the source of all complaints, the alpha and the omega of suburban grievances. She was the complainant, the investigator, and the judge, all wrapped up in a pastel pink tracksuit. "The bylaws," she continued, her voice rising with the fervor of a street preacher, "do not make exceptions for inconveniences. The rules are what separate us from chaos. Remove them from the driveway immediately. It lowers the tone of the neighborhood." I looked at the crates. I looked at the fire. I looked back at her. The sheer, glorious, unadulterated absurdity of it all was almost breathtaking. My Tuesday had started so normally. At 9 a.m., I was on a conference call for my tech job, nodding along to a presentation about synergizing our core competencies, all while using a digital background to hide the fact that a 3-legged cat named Tripod was attempting to make a nest on my keyboard. I was Leo Maxwell, mild-mannered software guy. Now, at 1 p.m., I was Leo Maxwell, aspiring refugee, being cited for a zoning infraction by a petty tyrant while the world literally burned around us. How did I get here? The short answer was my grandfather's will. He'd left me his house 6 months ago, a lovely, if dated, 70s ranch in what appeared to be a quiet, peaceful suburb. I loved the space, which was perfect for my real passion. Fostering and rehoming animals that other people wouldn't take. The old, the anxious, the 3-legged. I had a small menagerie at any given time, a rotating cast of furry misfits. The long answer was Brenda. I'd learned quickly that Pleasant View Estates was less of a community and more of a dictatorship. My welcome mat was deemed excessively whimsical. My trash cans, retrieved 61 minutes after the designated pickup time, earned me a sternly worded letter. Brenda patrolled the streets in a golf cart, armed with binoculars, and a bottomless well of righteous indignation. She was the reason the neighborhood's oak trees were all trimmed to a perfect, unnatural sphere, like giant, leafy lollipops. The current crisis was simple. My sedan could fit me, my go-bags, and the 2 dogs, Buster, the one-eyed pug currently snoring in his carrier, and Gilda, the anxious German shepherd mix whining softly by the door. But it couldn't fit the cats. Tripod, the fluffy and perpetually unimpressed Persian named Chairman Meow, and the 4 kittens I'd dubbed the Vandals. My contact at the local rescue, Maria, was on her way to grab them in her van. The plan was to stage the crates at the end of the driveway for a quick pickup, a plan that Brenda was now physically obstructing. She had planted her feet, blocking me from setting down the last crate. "I am documenting this flagrant violation," she announced, holding up her phone to take a picture of the offending carriers. "This will result in a significant fine." A text buzzed on my phone. It was Maria. "Bad traffic. Cops are redirecting. Might be 20, 30 mins. Stay safe." I didn't have 30 minutes. The wind was picking up, carrying the acrid smell of burning pine. I looked at Brenda's smug, triumphant face. I looked at the helpless animals in their carriers. And then, I looked at my garage. An idea, born of desperation and a deep, simmering well of spite, began to form. A slow, malicious grin spread across my face. "Fine, Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You're right. The bylaws are the law. Can't argue with that. Let me just go get the compliant vehicle." I turned and walked back toward the garage, leaving her looking momentarily confused, but confident in her victory. "Oh, you sweet summer child," I thought. "You have no idea what's coming." The garage door rumbled open with a low growl, a sound that promised something more substantial than my 4-door sedan. Brenda stood with her hands on her hips, a self-satisfied smirk plastered on her face, expecting me to emerge, defeated, in my sensible hybrid. Her smirk began to falter as the nose of the vehicle came into view. It was large. It was white. It was not a sedan. What emerged from my garage was a 2022 Ford Transit high-roof cargo van. I had bought it 6 months ago at a city auction. It was a former animal control vehicle, and I had poured a significant amount of my savings and freelance income into making it the ultimate rescue machine. It was my secret weapon, my Noah's Ark on wheels, and I had never imagined its glorious debut would be in a suburban standoff. The van was painted a sterile, clinical white, the kind of white that suggests official business and clipboards of its own. On the side, my friend who runs a graphics shop had done a masterful job. In large, professional-looking blue lettering, it read, "Maxwell Animal Rescue and Emergency Transport." Beneath that, in a smaller, equally serious font, "Feline and Canine First Response, specializing in critical care relocation." The pièce de résistance was the light bar on the roof. I had meticulously researched the legality. Red and blue lights were a big flashing felony, but amber and white strobes, the kind used by tow trucks, construction crews, and utility vehicles, perfectly legal for a private vehicle involved in what could be generously termed hazard management. Brenda's jaw went slack. Her clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the asphalt. I hopped out of the driver's side, a remote in my hand. With a theatrical click, I hit a switch. The amber and white lights on the roof began to flash in a silent, hypnotic rhythm, painting Brenda's horrified face in strobing bursts of light. I clicked another button. The large side door slid open with a smooth pneumatic hiss, revealing the custom-fitted interior. It wasn't a messy van. It was a mobile command center. The walls were lined with gleaming, stainless steel cages of various sizes, all securely bolted to the frame. There was a small medical supply station with neatly labeled drawers an oxygen tank, and its own battery-powered climate control system humming quietly. It looked, for all intents and purposes, like a veterinary ambulance, because in a way it was. I had designed it for large-scale hoarding cases or evacuating small shelters, never for a personal squabble. But desperate times, as they say, call for overwhelming displays of preparedness. What is that?" Brenda finally stammered, her voice a squeak. "It's my emergency pet transport, Brenda," I said cheerfully, grabbing the first cat carrier. I slid the vandals into a large built-in kennel and secured the latch. It clicked shut with a satisfyingly final sound. "Fully licensed and insured, just a little hobby of mine." I grabbed the next carrier. Chairman Meow gave Brenda a look of utter disdain as I loaded him in. He was on my side. Brenda was sputtering, trying to reboot her brain. This is a commercial vehicle. That's another violation, Article 9. You can't park a commercial vehicle in a residential driveway." She was fumbling for her fallen clipboard, trying to find the relevant scripture. "Is it, though?" I mused, helping a nervous Gilda up the small ramp into the van. "It's registered to me personally, as a private van. The signage is just a hobby, like people who put racing stripes on their minivans, expressing themselves. I think the bylaws have a provision for personal expression, don't they?" I was making that last part up, but she didn't know that. Her entire worldview was crumbling. This wasn't in her script. I wasn't a sheepish resident to be cowed by her binder of rules. I had a bigger, more official-looking vehicle than she did. I gently placed Buster, the one-eyed pug, into his own cozy spot, then went back for tripod. Once all the animals were secured, their nervous noises muffled by the insulated van, I slammed the side door shut. It sealed with another authoritative hiss. I walked around to the driver's side, giving Brenda a wide, friendly smile. "Thanks for your concern for the neighborhood's aesthetic, Brenda. But as you can see, the driveway is clear now. All personal items have been properly stowed in a non-public-facing vehicle. I believe I am now in full compliance." I got in, fired up the engine, and put the van in reverse. Brenda just stood there, a statue of impotent fury in the middle of the street, as ash continued to fall around her. Just as my tires hit the street, my moment of triumph was interrupted by flashing lights. Not my legal amber and white ones, but the deeply official red and blue kind. A police cruiser was coming down our street, slowly but purposefully, no doubt to make sure the last of the residents were clearing out. Brenda saw her salvation. Her stupor broke, and she transformed into a whirlwind of frantic energy. She waved her arms, flagging down the cruiser with the desperation of a castaway spotting a ship. The police car pulled to a stop. A young officer with a weary, seen-it-all expression on his face rolled down the window. His name tag read Miller. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and I couldn't blame him. "Officer, thank heavens!" Brenda exclaimed, rushing to his window. She pointed a trembling finger at me, then at my van. "Officer, this man is operating an illegal business out of his home. He has this fraudulent emergency vehicle. He's violating a dozen HOA bylaws. He's creating a public nuisance and refusing to comply with the rules." I killed the engine and got out of the van, holding my hands up in a gesture of non-aggression. Officer Miller's eyes flicked from Brenda's hysterical face to my calm demeanor, then to the very official-looking van, and finally to the ominous pillar of smoke that now seemed to be looming directly over our neighborhood. His face settled into a mask of profound unimpressiveness. "Sir," he said, his voice flat and tired. "What's going on here?" "Officer," I said, keeping my tone respectful and calm. This was not the time to be snarky. "My name is Leo Maxwell. This is my house, that is my van. Inside are my foster animals. We are complying with the mandatory evacuation order. Mrs. Butterman was concerned that my pet carriers were in violation of a local aesthetic ordinance. I delivered that last line with perfect sincerity. I saw a muscle twitch in Officer Miller's jaw. He was trying not to smile. He turned his gaze back to Brenda. It was a look that could curdle milk. "Ma'am, is your home prepared for evacuation?" "My home is perfectly compliant with all city and HOA regulations," she insisted, completely missing the point. "But his van, the lights, the lettering, it's deceptive. He's pretending to be an ambulance." "The lights are amber, officer," I interjected smoothly. "DOT approved for utility vehicles, completely street legal. And the lettering just describes my hobby. It's a free country, last I checked." Officer Miller held up a hand, silencing us both. He let out a long, slow sigh, the sigh of a man who was paid far too little to deal with this level of nonsense. He looked at Brenda, then at me, then back at the fire. He made a decision. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone that brooked no argument. "There is a wildfire that is currently threatening to burn this entire neighborhood to the ground. I do not have time for, nor do I care about your bylaws. My only concern is getting every living creature, human and animal, out of this area safely. Are you leaving, or are you going to continue obstructing an evacuation?" Brenda's mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. She had played the authority card, and a higher authority had just trumped her. She stammered. Officer Miller ignored her and looked at me. "Sir, is there anything you need from us to get on your way?" "Nope. We're all set, officer," I said, giving a slight nod of thanks. "Just getting the family to safety." I patted the side of the van where I knew Gilda was probably trembling. "Good man," Miller said with a nod of his own. "Get out of here. Be safe." He gave Brenda one last withering glare, then rolled up his window and slowly drove off to continue clearing the street. The message was clear. "The adults are busy. Stop wasting our time." The victory was so sweet it was almost dizzying. I had not only won, but I had won in front of an audience, with the law itself siding with me over her. I gave Brenda a polite, infuriatingly cheerful nod, the kind one gives a slightly dotty aunt. "You have a safe evacuation, Brenda," I said, then got back in my van. I fired up the engine, flipped on my perfectly legal amber flashers for good measure, and pulled away from the curb. The last thing I saw in my rearview mirror was the solitary figure of Brenda Butterman standing alone in the street, covered in a fine layer of ash, watching her authority and control turn to dust around her. I knew with absolute certainty this wasn't over. I had won the battle. But the war for Pleasant View Estates had just begun. The fire, which the news later dubbed the Ridgecrest Inferno, was contained after 3 long days. Our neighborhood, thankfully, was spared by a last-minute wind shift and the tireless work of the firefighters. The evacuation order was lifted, and I drove the big white van, now affectionately nicknamed the Beast of Burden, back home. The air still smelled of smoke, and a layer of gray ash coated every surface, making the whole world look like a sad black and white photograph. But my house was standing. My animals, after a brief but chaotic stay at a friend's farm, were safe. I unloaded them one by one, and they immediately set about exploring the house, ensuring everything was just as they'd left it. As I carried the last of my supplies to the front door, I saw it. Taped to the wood was a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the crisp, embossed logo of the Pleasant View Estates Homeowners Association. It felt heavier than it should. My stomach tightened. The counterattack had arrived. I sat down at my dining room table, the animals settling into their usual spots around me, and opened the envelope. It wasn't a letter. It was a salvo. A meticulously documented, professionally printed barrage of violations, all logged by Brenda on the day of the evacuation. Violation Notice #1. Bylaw, Article 7, Section C, Storage of Personal Items. Infraction 3.3. Unapproved containers, pet carriers, left in public view on driveway. Fine, $150. Violation Notice #2. Bylaw, Article 9, Section A, Vehicle Restrictions. Infraction: parking of a commercial modified vehicle, Ford Transit van with signage, in a residential driveway. Fine, $250. Violation Notice #3. Bylaw, Article 12, Section F, Home-based businesses. Infraction: operation of an unapproved home business, Maxwell Animal Rescue, as evidenced by vehicle signage. Fine, $500. And it didn't stop there. She had clearly used the time I was gone to perform a full forensic audit of my property. There was a fine for my lawn being, and I quote, approximately 0.25 inches in excess of the regulated maximum height of 3 inches. A fine for a misaligned roof shingle that was probably just a trick of the light. A fine for my house numbers, which were apparently suffering from excessive fading. The grand total came to $1,075. I stared at the papers, a cold fury building in my chest. This wasn't about rules or maintaining property values. This was a personal vendetta. This was punishment for humiliating her. The fines were absurd, and I could probably fight them in the HOA's kangaroo court, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She would just keep coming, finding new, ever more ridiculous infractions. She would paper-cut me to death, draining my time and my money until I either submitted or moved out. I looked around the room. At Buster, snoring his one-eyed pug snores on the rug. At Chairman Meow, judging me from the top of the bookshelf. This was my home. My grandfather's home. It was the only place I'd ever had that was big enough to do the rescue work that gave my life meaning. And I wasn't going to be driven out by a power-mad woman in a golf cart. Fighting her on her terms was a losing game. The game was rigged, so I had to change the game. I couldn't break her rules. But what if I could use them against her? What if I could follow her precious bylaws so perfectly, so completely, so maliciously that she would choke on them? I stood up and walked to the bookshelf where the previous owner's binder sat. It was thick, white, and embossed with the HOA logo. The Book of Grudges. The Bylaws of Pleasant View Estates. I blew a layer of dust off the cover, carried the 200-page tome of misery to the dining room table, and set it down next to the stack of violations. I brewed a fresh, strong pot of coffee, grabbed a pack of multicolored highlighters, and sat down. "All right, Brenda," I muttered to the empty room, cracking open the binder. "Let's dance." The next 3 days were a blur of caffeine and legalese. I fell down a rabbit hole of subsections, appendices, and amendments. The Pleasant View Estates bylaws were a masterpiece of terrible writing, a labyrinth of contradictions and vague pronouncements clearly cobbled together over decades by committees of bored, petty people. My tech background came in handy. I scanned every single page, ran them through an OCR program, and created a searchable digital document. Now I could hunt for keywords, cross-reference articles, and find the cracks in Brenda's fortress. I searched for pets, animals, structures, fences, business, vehicles. I discovered that my commercial vehicle fine was baseless. The bylaw she cited specifically defined a commercial vehicle as one with a ladder rack or visible external equipment. My van had neither. Strike one for Brenda. The home business fine was also weak. The bylaw required evidence of significant commercial traffic or on-site client services. My rescue was a non-profit hobby. I had no clients visiting my home, strike two. But just fighting the fines was defensive. I needed to go on the offense. I wanted something that would not only be a permanent solution for my animals, but also a permanent, unavoidable monument to Brenda's defeat. A daily reminder, sitting right in her line of sight, that she had picked a fight with the wrong guy. And then I found it. Buried deep within the binder, between the regulations for satellite dishes and the approved species of non-invasive shrubbery, was Article 11, Auxiliary Structures and Property Enhancements. It was a dense, jargon-filled section meant to regulate things like garden sheds, gazebos, and pergolas. It was designed with aesthetics in mind, written with the clear intent of preventing anyone from building anything interesting, but tucked away in Section D was a subsection titled Animal Enclosures. My heart started to beat faster. It was as if I'd found a secret cheat code. The rules were written with an incredible specificity that betrayed the author's complete lack of imagination. Rule 1. Color palette. All exterior surfaces must be painted using a color from the pre-approved HOA palette. A list of 12 depressing, soul-crushing shades of beige, gray, and taupe was provided in the appendix. Rule 2. Setback. The structure must be set back exactly 10 feet from all property lines, not at least 10 feet. Exactly. A bizarrely specific requirement. Rule 3. Height. The structure cannot exceed a maximum height of 15 feet at its highest point. Rule 4. Materials. The structure must be constructed of non-reflective, sound-dampening materials. Rule 5. Approval. All plans must be submitted for approval to the Architectural Review Committee, ARC, which, of course, Brenda chaired. I read the section 3 times, searching for the catch. And then I realized what wasn't there. There was no mention of purpose, no mention of style, and most importantly, there was absolutely no limit on the square footage. As long as a structure met the height, setback, color, and material requirements, it was by definition compliant. A wicked, beautiful, terrible idea began to bloom in my mind. I wasn't just going to build a dog run or a small catio. I was going to build the Colosseum of pet enclosures, a sprawling, multi-level, architecturally compliant monstrosity. It would be a state-of-the-art facility for my animals, giving them safe outdoor access. And it would be an unavoidable beige and gray eyesore that would dominate the view from Brenda's back porch. It would be a fortress of spite, built entirely from the bricks of her own ridiculous rulebook. I grabbed a piece of paper and a pen and started sketching. A 2-story catio running the entire 60-foot length of my backyard, with ramps and perches and scratching posts. Connected to it, a fully insulated, soundproofed dog run with its own climate control system. All of it exactly 10 feet from the fence line. All of it under 15 feet tall. All of it painted in the most offensively bland color combination imaginable. I laughed out loud. It was perfect. It was diabolical. It was malicious compliance of the highest order. Now I just needed to find someone crazy enough to build it. Finding a contractor willing to take on a project born of pure, unadulterated spite was an adventure in itself. My search became a parade of characters straight out of a sitcom. First up was Chad, a man whose business card just said visionary. He wore painfully tight jeans, a designer t-shirt, and had more product in his hair than a 90s boy band. He took one look at my preliminary sketches and scoffed. "No, no, no," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "I'm seeing clean lines, a Zen aesthetic. We can do a minimalist water feature, some bamboo, create a calming energy for the animals." "Chad," I said, "the goal here is not calming energy. The goal is overwhelming presence. And it needs to be painted desert taupe." He shuddered visibly. "I don't work with taupe. My artistic integrity won't allow it." I showed him the door, Next came Gary. Gary arrived 2 hours late in a beat-up pickup truck that looked like it ran on rust and prayers. He smelled faintly of cheap beer and desperation. He looked at my plans, whistled low, and scribbled a number on the back of a greasy napkin. It was suspiciously cheap. "So, you got the permits and all that?" he asked, scratching his neck. "HOAs can be a real pain. My cousin's wife's brother, he tried to build a deck, and they made him tear it down because his screws weren't galvanized." He seemed nice enough, but the distinct feeling that he might disappear halfway through the job with my deposit was too strong to ignore. I told him I'd think about it. I was starting to lose hope when the third contractor pulled up. He drove a sturdy, well-maintained work truck, and the man who stepped out looked like he'd been built from spare parts of old machinery. He was in his 60s, with a grizzled beard, hands like leather work gloves, and a tool belt that looked like it had seen more action than most war correspondents. His name was Sal. He walked in, gave me a firm handshake, and looked at the plans spread across my table. He was silent for a full minute, his eyes tracing the dimensions, the notes, the highlighted copies of the HOA bylaws I had taped to the wall. Finally, he looked up, a strange glint in his eye. "An HOA job, huh?" he grumbled. "I usually charge 20% extra for the headache." "Is the president a Brenda?" I blinked. "Yeah, Brenda Butterman. You know her?" A slow, grim smile spread across his face. "Kid, I've been building things in this county for 40 years. I know all the Brendas. I once had a Brenda make me restain an entire fence because the color was, and I quote, too cheerful. Tell me everything." I spent the next 20 minutes laying out the whole story. The evacuation, the crates, the van, the fines, the deep dive into the bylaws, and the grand, spiteful vision for my backyard. Sal listened intently, nodding along. When I finished, he didn't laugh. He looked at me with a newfound respect. "Malicious compliance," he said, the words rolling off his tongue like a sacred oath. "It's the only language these people understand. I had a guy once, they told him he could only have a 6-foot fence. Bylaws didn't say what kind. So we built him a 6-foot chain-link fence, and he planted the most aggressive, thorny climbing roses you've ever seen all along it. It was beautiful." He tapped the plans. "This is good, this is real good, but we can make it better, more compliant, more annoying." And just like that, I had found more than a contractor. I had found my co-conspirator, my general, my guru of grudge-based construction. Sal and I were going to build a masterpiece. The collaboration between Sal and me was less like a client-contractor relationship and more like two mad scientists perfecting their world-changing, or, in this case, neighborhood-annoying invention. We spread the blueprints across my dining room table, the official HOA color palette swatch sitting in the center like a holy relic. "Okay," I said, pointing at the list of 12 approved colors. "The structure itself needs a primary color. What's the absolute worst option here?" Sal squinted at the chart, rubbing his grizzled chin. "Well, Sandstone Dream is pretty pathetic. Coastal Fog is just gray pretending to be interesting, but for pure, soul-crushing blandness, you can't beat this one." He tapped a sickly beige color. "That's Desert Taupe. It's the color of sadness. It'll blend in with nothing and clash with everything. Perfect." "Desert Taupe it is," I said, making a note. "What about the trim? The doors, the window frames?" "Gotta be Misty Harbor," he said without hesitation. "It's a gray that actively sucks the joy out of your eyeballs. The contrast between the beige and the gray will be just magnificently drab." With the color scheme from hell decided, we moved on to the design. My initial sketch was ambitious, but Sal, with his decades of experience, refined it into a work of diabolical genius. The final design was glorious in its compliant ugliness. The main structure was a massive 2-story catio, a fully enclosed cat patio that ran the entire 60-foot length of my backyard. It was set exactly 10.0 feet from the rear and side property lines, a dimension Sal insisted on verifying with a laser measure. The catio was a maze of ramps, perches, bridges, and scratching surfaces, all visible through heavy-duty, rust-proofed wire mesh. The cats would think they'd died and gone to heaven. Connected to the catio via a secure tunnel was the dog run. This wasn't just a fenced-in patch of dirt. It was a 20 by 20 foot enclosure with a roof, full insulation, and walls made of a special sound-dampening composite material, perfectly compliant with Article 11's sound dampening requirement, and a feature Sal pointed out would prevent Brenda from ever lodging a valid noise complaint about barking. It would have its own HVAC unit, ensuring the dogs were comfortable year-round. The entire combined structure clocked in at just under 1,600 square feet of auxiliary space, with the highest point of the sloped roof measuring exactly 14 feet, 11 inches, a full inch below the legal limit. "She'll hate it," Sal said with a satisfied grunt, looking over the final drawings. "It's big, it's ugly, and there's not a single damn thing she can do about it." The next step was preparing the proposal for the Architectural Review Committee. This couldn't be sloppy. It had to be an ironclad, airtight document that left Brenda no wiggle room. I channeled my inner tech bro project manager. I created a full project proposal complete with professional 3D renderings of the structure from every angle. I included spec sheets for every single material, from the desert taupe paint to the specific gauge of the wire mesh. For every design choice, I cited the specific bylaw that justified it. Overall height, 1411, is in compliance with Article 11, Section A. Exterior color, THX 1138 Desert Taupe, is drawn from the pre-approved palette in Appendix C. Sound dampening wall panels are in accordance with the material guidelines of Article 11, Section D. It was a 30-page document of pure bureaucratic warfare. I printed 5 copies on high-quality paper and had them professionally bound. It was the most beautiful, passive-aggressive thing I had ever created. Holding the bound proposal in my hands, I felt a surge of confidence. Brenda wanted to play by the book? Fine. I was about to hit her with the whole library. The Architectural Review Committee meeting was held on a Wednesday night in the Pleasant View Estates Community Center, a small, stuffy room that smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. The committee consisted of 3 people: Brenda, seated in the center like a queen holding court, and 2 of her loyal retainers, a frail-looking woman named Muriel and a man named Stan, who seemed to be struggling to stay awake. I walked in, placed a professionally bound copy of my proposal in front of each of them, and began my presentation. Brenda's face was a study in controlled fury as I walked them through the plan. She flipped through the pages, her expression souring with each turn. She was looking for a flaw, a mistake, a single, misplaced comma she could use to torpedo the whole project. She found nothing. And so, I concluded, pointing to the 3D rendering of the finished structure, a beige behemoth dominating my backyard. As you can see, Project Catiopocalypse is in full compliance with all relevant HOA bylaws as outlined in Article 11. I am here tonight to seek the committee's official approval to proceed. I used the name Project Catiopocalypse with a completely straight face. I saw Stan choke back a small laugh. Brenda finally looked up from the document, her eyes narrowed to slits. This is an eyesore, Leonard," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "It's not a pet enclosure, it's a commercial-grade kennel. It's completely out of character with the neighborhood. The bylaws don't mention neighborhood character when it comes to auxiliary structures, Brenda. I replied smoothly, my heart hammering in my chest. They mentioned setbacks, height, materials, and colors. According to your own rules, which I have followed to the letter, this is a perfectly acceptable animal enclosure. You'll note I've chosen pre-approved color palette, number 7 for the exterior finish. She scrambled through her own binder, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. But the scale of it, it's completely unreasonable. Is it? I countered, leaning forward slightly. The bylaws place no restrictions on square footage or overall volume for this type of structure. They only limit the height and the setback, which, as my certified survey documents show, I have followed to the inch. If you believe the bylaws are deficient, I'd encourage you to propose an amendment to the community. That would, of course, have to be voted on by all the homeowners at the next annual meeting in 6 months. Until then, this plan is legally sound and fully compliant. Checkmate? I had her. I had her trapped in the prison of her own making, and the look on her face told me she knew it too. She looked to Muriel and Stan for support, but they just shrugged. Well, Brenda, Stan said, yawning, the paperwork all looks to be in order. He's followed the rules. Muriel nodded in agreement. It is very beige, which is on the list. Defeated, Brenda picked up the rubber stamp. Her hand was trembling with rage. She hovered over the approved box on my application for a long moment before bringing the stamp down with a vicious thud. The sound echoed in the silent room. She shoved the papers back across the table at me. As I gathered my things to leave, she cornered me by the door, her voice a low whisper. You will regret this, Leonard. I will be watching. Every nail, every screw. And the moment you step 1 millimeter out of line, I will bring the full weight of this association down on you. I just smiled, a wide, genuine smile of pure satisfaction. I'm counting on it, Brenda. See you at the groundbreaking. The following Monday at 7 a.m. sharp, the blissful morning quiet of Pleasant View Estates was shattered by the glorious roar of a diesel engine. Sal's crew had arrived, and they were not subtle. A large excavator crawled off a flatbed trailer and began to claw at my backyard, its metal bucket ripping up the turf that Brenda had once fined me for being a 1/4 inch too tall. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Brenda's promised surveillance began immediately. Her blinds were permanently drawn just enough for a pair of binoculars to peer through. She was the sniper in the window, waiting for me to make a mistake. The harassment was constant, creative, and utterly ineffective. On day 1, she called the City Code Enforcement Office, claiming we were working without permits. Sal calmly handed the inspector the thick folder containing our city-approved permits, the stamped HOA approval, and the certified survey. The inspector shot an annoyed look toward Brenda's house and told us to have a nice day. On day 2, she lodged a complaint about the porta-potty Sal had delivered for his crew, citing it as an unapproved temporary structure in public view. Sal responded by moving it to the backyard, neatly tucked behind a large oak tree, and sent Brenda a polite email with photos confirming its new, compliant location. On day 3, she tried to claim the noise from the cement mixer was violating the city's noise ordinance. Sal produced a decibel meter and demonstrated that the sound was well within the legal limits for daytime construction. The neighborhood began to take notice. The construction site became the local entertainment. Brenda's cronies would walk by, shaking their heads and muttering about property values. But something else started happening too. Small acts of rebellion began to sprout. Dave, my neighbor to the left whose property Brenda's rose bushes were encroaching upon, started bringing Sal's crew a box of donuts every morning. Just supporting local labor, he'd say with a wink. Carol, the woman who lived across the street, took up a new passion for aggressive gardening. This mostly involved turning on her sprinklers at maximum power, whenever Brenda stood on the edge of her lawn to take pictures, drenching her from the ankles down. One afternoon, I came out to find a case of cold beer on my porch with an anonymous note that simply said, "Give 'em hell." I wasn't just building a catio anymore. I was leading a suburban insurrection. Sal and his crew became local heroes. They were professional, clean, and unfailingly polite to everyone except Brenda, whom they ignored with a discipline that was almost an art form. They worked with ruthless efficiency, and the beige monstrosity began to rise from the mud of my backyard. The framing went up, a skeleton of wood that already dwarfed the surrounding manicured gardens. Then the walls, made of the special sound-dampening composite. Then the roof. Brenda's desperation grew with each new plank of wood. She bought a drone, a cheap little quadcopter, and tried to fly it over my property for a better view. The drone, however, encountered mysterious and powerful signal interference just as it crossed my property line. It wobbled, spun out of control, and crashed into the upper branches of a large tree in a different neighbor's yard. I made a mental note to thank the manufacturer of my new, ridiculously powerful Wi-Fi router. The war of inches, as Sal called it, was in full swing. Brenda was losing, and she was getting sloppy. The structure was nearly complete, a monument of malicious compliance painted in the soul-crushing hues of desert taupe and misty harbor. It was more hideous and more glorious than I had ever imagined. And I knew Brenda had one last desperate move to make. The email arrived on a Thursday evening, a week before the project's scheduled completion. It was a summons for an emergency HOA board meeting, called by President Butterman. The subject line was ominous. Urgent, health and safety violations at 12 Crestview Lane. That was my address. I read the attached agenda. Brenda was throwing a Hail Mary. She was claiming my new structure had altered the natural drainage gradient of the property, creating a hazardous runoff situation that was attracting vermin and noxious insects. Her evidence? A single, blurry photograph of a small puddle near the foundation after a rainstorm. Her proposed resolution was to demand an immediate cease and desist on all construction until a full, third-party environmental impact study could be performed, at my expense, of course. The study alone would cost thousands and delay the project for months, effectively killing it. It was a brilliant, desperate, and completely fraudulent move. The puddle had been caused by a gutter downspout that Sal's crew hadn't connected yet. It was a temporary, insignificant issue. But Brenda was dressing it up in the language of environmental disaster. "She's playing dirty," I said to Sal over the phone. "Always does when she's cornered," he grunted. "So what's the plan, kid? You gonna let her shut us down?" A slow grin spread across my face as I looked at my computer screen, where my security camera footage from the last week was neatly archived. "No, Sal," I said. "I think the plan is to give a little presentation." The community center was packed. Word had spread, and this was more than just an emergency board meeting. It was the title fight. On one side of the room sat Brenda's loyalists, a handful of elderly residents who looked stern and disapproving. On the other side was my camp, Dave of the Donuts, Carol of the Sprinklers, and at least a dozen other homeowners who had come to see the Queen get toppled. The air was thick with tension. Brenda started the meeting, her voice trembling with what she clearly hoped would pass for righteous concern. She presented her case with all the drama of a closing argument in a murder trial. "This monstrosity," she began, gesturing vaguely in the direction of my house, "is more than just an eyesore. It is a danger." She projected her blurry puddle photo onto the wall. "This, standing water, a direct result of the illegal and reckless construction, is a breeding ground for mosquitoes, for bacteria, for disease. We have a responsibility to protect the health and safety of our community." She went on for 10 minutes, weaving a tale of ecological collapse, of plagues of vermin, of plummeting property values, all stemming from my beige catio. It was a masterful performance. When she finished, she looked directly at me, a smug, triumphant look on her face. "The board," she declared, "has no choice but to issue an immediate cease and desist order." Then it was my turn. I walked to the front of the room, laptop in hand, and connected it to the projector. I didn't look nervous. I looked prepared. "Good evening, everyone," I said calmly. "Thank you, Brenda, for that very dramatic presentation. I, too, have a few slides to share." My first slide appeared on the screen. In big, bold letters, it read, "Project Catiopocalypse, a case study in bylaw compliance." A ripple of laughter went through my side of the room. Brenda's face tightened. "Let's first address the issue of the, hazardous runoff situation," I began. I clicked to the next slide. It showed a crystal-clear image from my security camera, time-stamped from 2 days ago. It showed the disconnected gutter spout. The next slide was a copy of the work order from Sal's crew, clearly stating, "Connect rear gutter downspouts," as a pending task. "As you can see," I explained, "the puddle was the result of a temporary and scheduled part of the construction process. It has since been rectified." I clicked again. The next slide was a letter from a city building inspector I'd called out that very afternoon, confirming that my property's drainage and grading were, in fact, fully up to code. Brenda's argument had been dismantled in under 60 seconds, but I wasn't done. "Now, while we're on the topic of property inspections," I said, my voice dangerously pleasant, "I'd like to talk about the methods used to obtain evidence for this meeting." The next slide was a series of still images captured from my security cameras. They clearly showed Brenda, late at night, sneaking onto my property with her phone to take pictures of the puddle. The room gasped. Trespassing. "But since we are also deeply concerned with bylaw violations," I continued, moving in for the kill, "I'd like to pivot to another matter entirely. Let's talk about Article 4, landscaping." I clicked to the final slide. It was a high-resolution satellite image of the neighborhood, with the official county property lines overlaid in bright red. I zoomed in, closer and closer, until Brenda's house and Dave's house filled the screen. And there, plain as day, was Brenda's prized, award-winning rose garden. "Article 4, Section F," I read aloud, my voice echoing in the stunned silence, "states that all permanent vegetative installations, including shrubbery, must maintain a setback of 24 inches from any property line." I clicked one last time, and a digital ruler appeared on the screen, measuring the distance from Dave's property line to the edge of Brenda's prize-winning rose bushes. "As you can see from this certified survey overlay," I announced, my voice ringing with triumph, "Mrs. Butterman's rose bushes are encroaching on Mr. Miller's property by a full 6 inches. All hell broke loose. Dave shot to his feet. "Are you kidding me?" he shouted, pointing at a stunned Brenda. "She sent me 3 violation notices and made me cut a limb off my oak tree because she claimed it was casting a shadow on her precious roses. And they're on my lawn?" Suddenly, everyone was shouting. Another homeowner stood up and yelled about how Brenda had fined her for having a wind chime. An old man in the back complained that she'd forced him to repaint his entire house because she didn't like the shade of white he'd chosen, even though it was on the approved list. Years of pent-up frustration and resentment erupted like a volcano. Brenda was speechless, her face ashen. Her reign of terror had been brought down not by a rebellion, but by her own rule book. She had been publicly, completely, and utterly defeated. 2 weeks later, I was sitting on my new back patio, sipping a hot cup of coffee in the morning sun. The air was crisp and clear. The only sounds were the chirping of birds and the gentle snoring of Buster, who was curled up at my feet. The reign of Queen Brenda was over. The fallout from the meeting had been swift and brutal. Faced with a full-scale homeowner revolt, the rest of the board had convened an emergency session. A real one this time. A vote of no confidence was held, and Brenda was unceremoniously stripped of her presidency and her seat on the Architectural Review Committee. The first official act of the new board president, a sheepishly proud Dave, was to issue a formal violation notice to Brenda for her encroaching rose bushes. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a trowel. The rumor mill, which in Pleasant View Estates ran more efficiently than the electrical grid, churned out the news a week later. The Buttermans were putting their house on the market. My project was finished. It was, objectively speaking, an architectural masterpiece of blandness. The massive two-story structure of desert taupe and misty harbor loomed over my backyard, a testament to what a man can achieve with enough spite and a searchable PDF. But inside, it was paradise. The cats were living their best lives. Tripod had claimed the highest perch in the catio as his personal throne, from which he could survey his domain. Chairman Meow was batting at a dangling toy with an expression that could almost be described as playful. The vandals were chasing each other up and down the ramps in a flurry of kittenish energy. In the dog run, Gilda was happily chasing a tennis ball, her anxiety seemingly melted away by the safe, secure space. I heard a familiar rumble, and Sal's work truck pulled up to the curb. He got out and walked back to join me, holding 2 celebratory beers. He handed one to me. "Well, kid," he said, looking up at the structure, "it's the ugliest damn thing I've ever built. I'm proud of it." "Couldn't have done it without you, Sal," I said, clinking my bottle against his. "Heard about Brenda," he said with a chuckle. "Sometimes you don't gotta fight City Hall. You just gotta make 'em live in the ugly house they designed themselves." We stood there for a minute in comfortable silence, watching the animals play. The beast of burden, my glorious white van, was parked in the driveway, its signage gleaming in the sun. It was a permanent fixture now, a silent guard dog. The new HOA board had reviewed my case and declared it a personal hobby vehicle, voiding Brenda's fines. I took a long sip of my beer and looked out over my little kingdom. A kingdom built on a foundation of rules, but cemented with the joy of seeing my misfit animals happy and safe. I had come to this neighborhood looking for a quiet place to live, and instead I'd fought a war. But looking at the peace I'd found, the quiet I'd earned, I knew it had all been worth it. Sometimes the best way to create harmony is to first embrace a little bit of well-documented, perfectly compliant, and utterly malicious chaos. And from where I was sitting, the view was finally, truly pleasant.